This webinar was recorded for subrecipients of the Tennessee Strong Families Grant on October 15, 2025. The webinar explained historical trends and root causes of father absence, identified social and developmental consequences of father absence, helped attendees recognize the benefits of father involvement, and described practical strategies for organizations to effectively engage fathers in their programs. The slides and reference materials are posted on our webpage for your reference and review. But without further ado, today we're going to be learning about strengthening families through father engagement from Chris Moulden. Chris serves as the fatherhood coordinator for TSF, where he brings over 17 years of experience working with non-residential parents through both TSEPP and Tennessee Department of Human Services. Throughout his career, he has dedicated himself to providing guidance, hands-on case management, and practical tools that help parents navigate and overcome life's challenges. His current work is centered on developing and implementing a fatherhood component within TSEPP. And I'm going to let Chris tell us what that stands for because I know I'll get it wrong. This initiative is designed to encourage, equip, and empower fathers to strengthen their own lives while positively impacting the well-being of their own children and families. Chris has spent lots of time digging into this fatherhood implementation and initiatives in programs like Tennessee Strong Families, and so I'm really excited for us to learn from him today. I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Chris. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you, Brooke, and good afternoon, everyone. As Brooke mentioned, I have worked with non-resident parents for close to 17 years, working both with mothers and fathers with a program, as she mentioned, called TSEP. But mainly working with fathers because 69% of our caseload has been men. And of course, I always get asked, what does TSEP stand for? It stands for Tennessee Child Support Employment and Parenting Program. This program has been around for about 20 years under the umbrella of the University of Tennessee's College of Social Work, and really is designed to help non-residential parents who have an open and active child support case and helping them overcome whatever barriers they're dealing with that might be keeping them from interacting with their children and becoming gainfully employed. So currently I am the fatherhood program coordinator for TSEP and for SWORPS. So that's a little bit about my background and my experience. So if you want to, let's go ahead and kind of, I guess, jump into the subject at hand. So how do we, or really should I say, how do you guys, as the practitioners and the coordinators providing these services, look at our subject, strengthening families through father involvement? You know, I really would like each of you to just take a moment and think about what that subject means to you. You know, by definition, it means really creating a stronger, healthier, and more stable homes by encouraging dads to be active, consistent, and positive in their children's lives. So with that being said, let's look at a few of the objective of today's that we really want to touch on. The first being, providing a little context around some of the causes of fatherhood absence and looking at some of the consequences that are associated with fatherhood absence. The third being recognizing the benefits of fatherhood involvement on many different levels with the family. And finally, looking at some of the key barriers to fatherhood engagement and highlighting some strategies that might get more fathers involved. So let's kind of start this conversation by simply looking at some facts around the root causes of increased father absence. If we go back and look at some data, in the early 1990s, research really began to just emerge showing a record number of U.S. children living in father-absent homes. So during this period of time from the 1960s through the 1990s, this number increased from 17 to 36%. Many researchers really attributed this to a large number of children being born out of wedlock and the increased divorce rates during this period of time. Of course, again, we can assume that all these fathers did not have some form of interaction with their children. But I did come across a study that stated that 27% of these children or children whose fathers live outside the home unfortunately have no contact with them. So to kind of put this in further perspective for you guys, let's look at some of the research that's closer to home. Per a survey, a family survey from 2022 in Tennessee, there were 516,000 children who were living in single parent households in the state. At the time, that was 37% of the children based on this survey. Of that 516,000, 80% were living in a fatherless home. So we're looking at some 412,000 children living without their dads. Again, we can't assume that all these children did not, have some form of regular visitation with their fathers, but it is still an alarming number. So let's kind of look at some of the consequences that can arise from fathers being absent from the home. First on this list is increased poverty. Per a U.S. Census Bureau, single mother households are 5 times more likely to live in poverty compared to a two-parent household. But another study reported that 28% of children living only with their mothers live below the poverty line compared to 11% of children in two-parent households. Therefore, obviously, there is an increased risk of being involved in a poverty level due to lack of fathers being in the home. The second consequence on this list is poor academic outcomes for children. Studies have shown that youth from fatherless homes are more likely to drop out of high school. And adolescents without engaged fathers are really less likely to pursue any form of higher education. A, a lot of this kind of stems from the economic strain of a single income family and reduced parent support. Basically, you have one parent that is really trying their best to manage it all. And, there might not be just enough time for homework help or for any type of school guidance for their children. The third consequence on this list is behavior and mental health issues. Studies have also shown that children growing up without an engaged father are at times at a higher risk of developing behavior issues such as defiance, aggression, and basically difficulty following rules. You know, some might also experience levels of depression or low self-esteem due to feeling, abandoned or neglected by one, and in some cases, maybe both parents. The last consequence on this list is delinquency and youth crime. Studies have also shown that children raised without a father's influence are sometimes at a greater risk of engaging in some form of delinquent behavior. As a father's absence can at times strongly be associated with higher rates of truancy, substance abuse, and potential gang association. Most of this, many will say, is attributed to the lack of structure and boundaries, settings that a lot of fathers tend to bring to households. So again, some of the consequences of a father not being involved in the household. Now that we've kind of just scratched the surface a little bit of a few of these issues that stem from fatherhood absence, let's examine the emergence of a fatherhood movement designed to kind of address some of these issues. As I mentioned earlier, with the rise of single parent homes, the conversation around the importance of fatherhood really began to emerge. Research began to be published around the impact of absent fathers in the 1980s. But programs like the National Fatherhood Initiative really began to launch a fatherhood movement in the 1990s. NFI really started looking at National Fatherhood Institution, sorry, at raising the awareness of the needs for fathers to interact with their children and encouraging the government and the social service sector to focus on fatherhood education and fatherhood initiatives. So let's fast forward a little bit. As the perspective of fatherhood has now transitioned from, or began to transition from, focusing on the problems of fathers not being in the home to the introduction of the importance of fatherhood inclusion and fatherhood education. That research is now focusing on the impact of fathers' involvement, such as increased academic achievements for their children, increased verbal and emotional development, children's higher self-esteem due to increased contact with their fathers and their whole families. They're also focusing on quality over quantity of interactions with their children. So before we proceed, and let's take just a little bit of a break and watch a video of just some children that I came across that really show the quality of interaction with their fathers and really what it means to them.
I have three daughters. Sydney is 6 years old, Layla will be 5 years old, and Charlie is 7 months old. Oh my gosh, I became a dad at the ripe age of 19. My college sweetheart, who is now my wife, we don't have a lot of outside help, so we heavily depend on each other. I work at night, she works during the day. My wife has to get up earlier for work because her commute is longer. I get the girls ready and take them to school, take care of whatever needs to be taken care of at home, picking up shifts, so leave for work about 2:30, 3 o'clock, get home about midnight, wake up and do the same thing.
It's a puzzle.
It's a puzzle. It is a puzzle. It's an unsolvable puzzle. My girls like to dance a lot, and so if I get up and do any type of dance with them, which I always do, that makes them laugh a lot. You get accustomed to being able to function off of a short amount of sleep. A full 8, it's been a while. Break time, breaks, you can get a break. I try to look at everything that they do as an opening to teach them a lesson, everything that they say. And I always question myself immediately, right? Was I too hard? Because I'm the only man, I don't want them to ever have an idea that I can't talk to dad because dad is like, dad is scary.
This is a real fear that you have, and I'm not saying it's like a fear every day.
Kind of a fear every day. I mean, think about it. What I mean by that is I think about it daily.
I like having fun with you every time, and I love the fun things that we do together.
I love the fun things that we two do.
Ah, man, y'all messing me up here.
I love you too, baby. I love the fun things we do too.
I love you, Daddy, because we just have fun. We just go in the park together. We just play Legos, and I love you.
Baby.
Love you, girl. Thank you for coming.
You surprised me. You surprised me.
When we go home, my daddy turns on the music and we all dance. And then we start having a dance party, and it's super fun.
So I'm not ashamed to admit that I'm a girl dad. So this really just resonates with me. And it kind of leads us directly into our next topic. The benefits of father involvement in the family. So, let's take a quick look at some of these topics. Lighter loads for mothers. A father's involvement means, mom doesn't have to carry the full weight of childcare, of discipline, and household routines on her own. You know, this balance reduces stress and burnout for moms. Healthier pregnancies and postpartum outcomes. And some of this is going to seem like common sense, but when fathers are more present and supportive, mothers often experience less stress and anxiety, which lowers the risk of complications such as preterm birth, low birth weights. When fathers share the responsibilities of post-birth, like night feedings and diaper changes, mothers tend to experience less exhaustion and lower rates of postpartum. The third highlights speaks to reducing harmful behaviors during pregnancies. Involved fathers are more likely to encourage and support mothers in attending prenatal appointments, making better nutrition choices and following some form of medical advice, which can also reduce mom's stress levels. Again, this is just another benefit of fathers being involved in the family dynamic. So let's take it a little further. Let's look at some of the benefits fathers gain from being actively involved in their families or with their children. They tend to have a greater sense of purpose. When fathers see the positive impact of their involvement, they often feel more valued, respected, and just have a higher level of confidence in themselves. Fathers also benefit emotionally. Being engaged can sometimes create that deeper family bond for dads, which can reduce stress and also increase emotional security for our fathers. Over the last few minutes, we've really discussed how everyone in the family benefits from an engaged father or an engaged dad. Two different things. But let's transition for a second and discuss the barriers to father engagement, which a lot of service providers, coordinators, and myself have dealt with in the past. The first barrier I really would like to touch on is just gender dynamics. From a practitioner or coordinator's point of view, by definition, how gender roles and expectations play out in a relationship and settings. I, think all coordinators and practitioners truly try their best to be aware of this and not do it. But, there are times when assumptions can be made during interactions with participants. An example would be if both parents are present at a meeting and that practitioner has questions about the caregiving for a child. And all those questions are asked to the mother. Without really thinking about it, the practitioner has unintentionally left the father out. And in some cases, reinforced that unequal parenting dynamic, which can further exclude or, undervalue dad by not asking his input at all. Again, I'm sure it's unintentional, but we just need to make sure that we're aware of it, as it could easily happen and become just another barrier for father inclusion. The second subject is cultural norms and gender roles. So, what are we really talking about here? Essentially, cultural roles are seen as a father's job is to provide for his family and to protect his family. You know, Depending on nationalities of fathers that you're working with, they may see some form of outside counseling, parenting classes, maybe even financial help as a form of weakness. Therefore, sometimes they will not engage because it truly goes against how they were raised and the cultural norms that they were raised under. Um, the third major barrier is, and this one's difficult, complex family dynamics. And the father could be, raising a child with multiple caregivers, such as the biological mother, the grandparents, and extended family members. Each relationship will really have its own expectations and boundaries. In some cases, dads might be dealing with conflicts that come with blended families. Again, there may be a different parenting style for a biological child and for a stepchild, which can really create overlapping roles and loyalties within the household. So, this really can make it difficult for fathers that really want to engage across the board, but they're cautious because they feel like they can be overlapping those boundaries or being seen as trying to replace a biological parent. So let's take a moment and just look at some of the barriers that practitioners and coordinators face when they're in the field or even in the office. The first barrier I really want to discuss, and I've touched on it already a little bit, is biases and discomfort. Let's start off by looking at a bias first. By definition, a bias can be viewed as assumptions, attitude, or stereotypes that, can often influence how a person or a practitioner interacts with their participants. In this case, we're interacting with our fathers. A gender bias, as I mentioned earlier, can be as simple as assuming that the mother is the primary caregiver of the family. To the practitioner's defense, this is often, again, an unconscious assumption that can be true in some cases, but we really need to be careful about making it. Coordinators need to really make sure that they're asking non-gender specific questions like, who is the primary responsible caregiver for this child, or something to that effect. Another bias that can easily happen is assuming the mother is the default parent, and the father's role in planning for the child really depends on her approval. So by default, I mean that the parent that is carrying the heavier load when it comes to caring for the child. So these are just a few examples of how easily biases can happen when working with families that we just really need to make sure that we are being aware of. The second part of this barrier is discomfort. And by definition, this relates to the sometimes the lack of confidence a service provider may feel with a certain group. In this case, again, working with fathers. In some cases, this can really be attributed to the potential resistance or defensiveness after working with some dads in the past. Or in some cases, it really could just be some form of personal discomfort due to someone's own experiences. I've spoken with several caseworkers that I have worked with personally that really did not have the best relationship with their fathers growing up. And they really have acknowledged that they have to make a conscious effort at times to really be aware of those potential biases that they might bring into a conversation due to those experiences. The second barrier, in some cases, is the lack of training. Historically, most field-based training focuses on the child and the mother, at least from what I have seen. And, practitioners trained by these models may automatically see mom as the primary caregiver. In these situations, the father can be easily overlooked and again may believe that their involvement is just not valued. Again, most of this is unintentional, and I want to keep saying that. But it can contribute to dads really not feeling comfortable seeking services because they don't feel like there's a value in them being involved. Um, the third is institutional gaps. You know, these gaps closely tie into the lack of training that we've discussed earlier, as many institutions center their training on the idea that the moms are the primary caregiver for the whole family. From a policy perspective, they, have adopted a kind of a one size fits all approach to field services that focuses on mom. This encompasses content, sequence, and the length of meetings. Even scheduling meetings around mom's schedules sometimes makes it hard for some fathers to participate. Additionally, intake forms and program materials often portray mom as the caregiver solely for children. So when we kind of take just a little bit of a step back, it becomes clear that some of these barriers are not about the father's unwillingness to engage, but about a system of training sometimes that can unintentionally place barriers in the father's way of engaging. So, talked a lot here. We've looked at some of the barriers for fathers and for practitioners. Let's explore how we can maybe effectively engage our fathers during home visits. What can we do to potentially encourage our fathers to really be more involved? One of the first ones that we've done in our program is contacting our fathers between visits. And it can be a strong tool in engaging them. A quick call, a text, an email, can show fathers that they are important in the process. And it can also help just be a reminder and encourage them to be more involved in their child's case. There's a program that really is focusing on this specific thing. It's under the umbrella of the National Fatherhood Initiative. And, some of you might have expecting parents on a caseload. And NFI offers a program called Text for Father for expecting fathers. It is a joint research program with Johns Hopkins University centered around text messages to fathers with tips for expecting dads around how to support mom, bonding with their babies, and building a strong co-parenting relationship. I think, Brooke, I'd sent that information to you, so you might be able to put that in the chat maybe if you have it available.
I can, and I'll send it in the follow-up this afternoon too. We did send that out when you sent it to me, Chris, so some of them may have it.
Okay, awesome.
That's a great resource. Thanks for mentioning that again.
No problem. So the next one is, understanding the father. The coordinator's taking the time to get to know who the father is, his background, his goals. And I really know this is asking a lot, as we may not have direct access and we all have time constraints. But if there is an opportunity, this truly can, build trust with the father and the practitioner as well. So the next one is just creating that father-friendly environment. I think this is super important, as it signals that, dads are welcomed and they're valued. Little things like the image that you see on the screen of the father and his daughter, on intake forms or program materials, maybe offering some type of visitation times that are outside of the traditional 9 to 5 as a way to try to increase, father inclusion. And the last one on this list is incentivizing fathers. This actually can have a dual effect. Providing gas cards, childcare support, or maybe even food vouchers can sometimes reduce the stress for dads when it comes to potentially, attending some form of visitation. In my program, we've offered vouchers for family days at the zoo, and it has been somewhat successful. This also can be a way of kind of drawing a father into his first visit, where there will be an opportunity as a practitioner, as a coordinator, to kind of continue to build that trust and show the fathers that they are, of value to their families, but also the value of your program. Train and prepare. We've touched on this in a previous section. Basically, this means making sure that all of our staffs are trained on the unique benefits of father involvement for children's development and adequately trained on sometimes, knowing how to deal with difficult conversations around the resistance and defensiveness that some fathers may have to services without some form of judgment. I think this one is super important where, you know, sometimes hiring a fatherhood coordinator, a male fatherhood coordinator, or partner with male focused organizations. Fathers can sometimes be skeptical about family services and collaborating with groups like maybe a men's ministry, maybe a fatherhood nonprofit, or a barbershop can boost your program's credibility in the community where, dads really feel comfortable. Maybe consider inviting a male member to join home visits. Of course, you need to make sure and review with your agency for compliance, but I don't see the harm in bringing someone else in that can bring a father to the table to support his children. And probably one of the most important, things that can be done is involving mom as a ally in recruitment. Now, we all know this one can be a slippery slope, but mothers can kind of be that bridge that allows fathers to engage in home visiting. Um, with this one, communication is key to really making this work. This is where, as the coordinator, you have to really engage mom about potential conflicts or inconsistencies from the father in the past that might be red flags. Hopefully listening to some of these concerns will help reduce mom's stress and resistance to joint visitation. But the important part here is it must be made clear that mom's role in getting dad involved is to support her and the children, and it's not to replace her so that she feels comfortable with bringing the father in. So I've said a lot in a short period of time, but kind of in conclusion, just the calls to action by all service providers to make a conscious effort to see every father as a partner and not as a optional participant. Encouraging organizations to really invest in training to understand fathering dynamics better, to make sure that your program is focusing on, inclusivity, sorry, and make sure to embrace fatherhood as a integral part of the family's well-being. Okay? Again, a lot in a short period of time. I will turn this back over to Brooke for any questions that you guys might have, and I will try my best to answer them.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris. That was an awesome presentation, and you gave us a lot of good things to think about. I'll go ahead and open the floor for questions if you want to put them in the chat, or feel free to come off mute as well. How, as practitioners, do you think people can keep a neutral stance in some of these situations where mom and dad may be at odds, or dad may be at odds with, like you said, a grandparent who might be helping to parent the child? What are some rules of thumb to make sure that you're being a neutral party in that?
And that's a tough one, Brooke. And that we see that quite often. A little bit more about my background, guys, is I work closely with child support. So in court quite often, and I see some of these cases where co-parents are just not getting along. And I try to really advise a lot of my fathers to just take a moment and step back and not go with your first reaction. Make sure that every conversation that you have with a co-parent is going to be child focused and child centered. And that's tough sometimes. And unfortunately, it comes down to a lot of dads feel like they um they always lose in those conversations. But we try to encourage them to keep moving forward, because what you're thinking of as a loss is you might get to spend some time with your child, and then you get to spend more time down the road, and you're winning in the long run. So just, I guess, to answer that question, just make sure to not have that gut reaction and keep everything child focused and child centered with your responses.
I think a lot of that really made me think too, like what you were talking about as far as like our assumptions that we don't even realize we have, right? You hand the paperwork to mom, and you're, kind of, unfortunately, not intentionally, denying dad an opportunity to step up, maybe if he wanted to, or maybe he had something to give. So
That is
um,
correct.
that's something good to think about.
And it happens more often than we probably want to think about. Personally, it's happened to me. And it wasn't done out of, it was just in a school setting.
Yeah.
And my wife has always been the one to kind of communicate more with those individuals, and I happened to be there for that meeting. And it probably took about 30 to 40 minutes, and it was an hour-long meeting before someone really actually addressed me being in the room. I wasn't offended by it, but I noticed it. So that it probably happens more than we think.
Yeah, like you said, even if it's unintentional,
Hmm.
still happens. If anything comes up and you all have any specific questions, maybe about implementing fatherhood in your own programs, we know where Chris is, so we can always find him afterwards too and be able to ask him. So feel free to send us an email to our help desk if anything comes up afterwards. But thank you so much, Chris, for presenting on this awesome topic, and just for giving us new things to think about and consider in programs that are trying to get some of these things up and running. So once I get the video uploaded to our YouTube channel, it'll be posted on our webpage for your reference, or if you want to share it with any of your other colleagues. And thank you everybody also who made time to attend today, and for being here. And we will follow up with the email this afternoon that has your CEU stuff and our training evaluation and some materials from Chris as well.